Urban wilderness is a precious commodity. You know, it's really nice to be able to get out for a hike and not have to go very far. You know, if you can find somewhere that you can get out to after a day at work, or maybe you don't have a car and you want to be able to get there by the bus. Well, that's exactly the kind of place I am right now, here on the edge of Kearney Lake at the end of Collins Road. This is the Blue Mountain Birch Cove Wilderness Area, and I'm at one of the many access points to this spectacular area. You can walk up the ridge behind the fence on either side to reach the Hobsons Lake Trail. This access sits along Kearney Lake just across from the Larry Utech interchange and some fairly high-density living. Crossing here into the wilderness area is actually going across a private easement which separates municipal land on the roadside from the parkland. I will actually find myself drifting in and out of different land designations on this trail network, but more on that later. For now, it's important to know that there are numerous trail options in this wilderness from this access point as well as others. So this survey marker is a good example of the different land use and different land designations in this area. Of course, I came through a private easement to get onto the trail. To my left is provincial wilderness area. It's actually designated as such. And the municipality has been acquiring land. So until around 2015, 2016, the land that way and around Hobsons Lake, where I'm going, was actually private, although the trail went around it. Since then, the municipality has acquired it. But you'll see these survey markers around which sort of mark all the different land plots that are in this area. If I had chosen to go the other way on this trail network, I would have taken the Kearney Lake Trail, which, as the name suggests, would take me right next to Kearney Lake itself. That trail heads south along the lake to Masquaw Canoe Club. Masquaw was founded in 1974 and has been a fixture in the paddling community ever since, developing recreational and elite paddlers. 2012 Olympic bronze medalist Mark de Jong paddled out of that club. In 2018, Mark was named one of Nova Scotia's 15 greatest athletes. Now, the name of the club, Masquaw, is interesting. It is an indigenous name, but it's Cree, not Mi'kmaq. Masquaw is the Cree word for bear, which was an important symbol representing good medicine and is a powerful spirit in that community. The Cree are an indigenous community which is and was primarily found in Quebec and to the west. So why a Cree name? After all, it and other Cree words are much more commonly used as business names in central Canada and the northern US. While the origins of the club aren't clear, in the 1970s there was a trend towards using indigenous names for clubs and businesses, and so it's likely no more complicated than it being a name someone liked the sound and meaning of, without giving much thought to the lack of association between the Cree and Nova Scotia. So at this point, I've actually reached the loop portion of the Hobsons Lake Loop Trail, and so obviously I can go either way. The closest route to the lake is this way, and I'm gonna go that way because my goal is to eventually reach Ash Lake and Fox Lake as well. Now, Hobsons Lake is the first lake I'm gonna see on this journey. It's also the smallest lake on today's hike. Just a little further up the trail here, and I will have a vantage point over the lake on land that not too long ago was privately held. So this is, of course, the Hobsons Lake Lookoff and Hobsons Lake below me. Now, as you look around, a lot of this view is covered by trees, but through the trees over that way, you can see the Larry Utech interchange and some of the development there, and you get a sense of just how close you are to urban development, even though in the middle of this, it can feel like you're in the middle of nowhere. If you were trying to get a sense of this area, it can be a little confusing. There is the provincial Blue Mountain Birch Cove Wilderness Area. Then there is the conceptual boundary of a regional park, which includes lands not yet publicly owned. And then there is the overall Blue Mountain Birch Cove Wilderness Area, which goes beyond the proposed park boundaries and includes public and private land, as well as lands held by the Nova Scotia Nature Trust. Through the trees, you can see Hobsons Pond. The municipality has focused acquisition efforts on lands that would form part of the park. The area I'm hiking now is within that very park boundary. Nova Scotia Nature Trust and others have focused on acquiring lands elsewhere in the area, including closer to where a highly controversial proposed highway, Highway 113, has been discussed. Now, whether that highway will ever be built is questionable. In 2015, provincial staff expanded the wilderness area to include land to the north of the proposed highway corridor. However, they specifically left the highway corridor, which would bisect the wilderness area, out of the protected lands. Protecting more of the lands is seen as beneficial to the protection of wildlife and offering the public large, natural green spaces. But there is also concern over the management work and the funds that would take. To date, almost all of the trail work and area maintenance, such as it is, has been done by volunteers, sometimes formally and sometimes informally. Up on my right here, hidden in the trees, is yet another one of the many trail connections you'll find in this wilderness area. That one will take you about 1 kilometer to another access point on Lakeshore Drive in Kingswood next to Ragged Lake. It is not the same Ragged Lake as Ragged Lake Industrial Park, which is found on Highway 333 or very close to that. Well, after the break, I am continuing my journey in the Blue Mountain Birch Cove Wilderness Area as I head off towards Ash Lake.
Won't you be mine? Feel the sunshine.
I'm in the Blue Mountain Birch Cove Wilderness Area, and I'm exploring some of the trails and visiting some of the lakes that make this place so majestic. I've just passed both Hobsons Lake and Hobsons Pond, and I'm making my way to Ash Lake. Now, at this intersection is the Ash Lake Wilderness Trail, and it's a loop. You can take it either way, and you can circumnavigate Ash Lake itself. Now, I'm kind of picking up a little bit of each of the trails, and I'm going to be going to my left here. However, if you were to follow to the right, you could connect on to the Chain of Lakes Trail and the Beachville Lakeside Timberley Trail. You would pass Crane Lake. And actually, as you passed Crane Lake, you would come upon the remains of an old building there as well. So there's certainly lots to see that way. But my journey today takes me in this direction. Well, this is Ash Lake. Now, it is the largest lake on my journey. It is actually also the largest lake in this wilderness area. At least it's the largest lake that is entirely surrounded by forest. Kearney Lake, which was near where I started, and Fraser's Lake, which is on the other end of this wilderness, are larger, but they are not completely surrounded by wilderness. Ash Lake is about 3.8 kilometers in length. This is not the only Ash Lake in this area. Much like Ragged Lake, there is another lake with a naming twin not far away. Only 2 kilometers from here, just outside the wilderness, is a smaller body of water, but with the same name, Ash Lake. Both are probably named for the white, black, or green ash tree, which were once common in this area. All are now at risk, with the white and black ash now critically endangered, after suffering devastating attacks by the emerald ash borer, which was accidentally introduced to North America in 2002. The Confederacy of Mainland Mi'kmaq has a program to restore the black ash, of which there are only about 1,000 remaining in Nova Scotia. The program collects black ash seeds to replant the species and help it thrive. Why the black ash in particular? Well, it's a significant tree in Mi'kmaq culture. It was used to create things like canoe ribs, baby cradles, and even hockey sticks. Most important, the black ash is what many baskets are made from, which was historically an important income stream for Mi'kmaq families. So this is where the Ash Lake Wilderness Trail basically comes to an end. And if I head this way, I'll be back on the Hobsons Lake Trail. Now this trail over here is the Portage Trail, and this will take you between Ash Lake and Fox Lake, making it easier to carry a canoe or kayak between those lakes. Of course, you wouldn't start your adventure by boat in either Fox or Ash Lake. There's an 8-lake canoe and portage route, which takes you through Susie's Lake, Corey Lake, Fox Lake, Ash Lake, Crane Lake, Three Finger Lake, Big Horseshoe Lake, Big Cranberry Lake, and back to Susie's Lake. It involves 9 portages of varying lengths, with this portage route being one of the longest. Well, this is Fox Lake, and this lake is popular with paddlers and with swimmers. There's a number of swimmers on this spring day up the end of the lake. This is the 3rd lake on my journey today, but one of many, many lakes within this wilderness area. I'm gonna head up off to a bit of a look-off. Hopefully I'll be able to see the area around Fox Lake. This trail connection is called Tricky Trek. You can probably guess how it got its name. This is where things get a little complicated land-wise. According to the municipality's regional plan, I am well within the conceptual park boundary of the Blue Mountain Birch Cove Lakes. However, this is almost all private land from here across Susie's Lake and Corey Lake. While the trails and other evidence here indicate that hiking, swimming, and camping have occurred here, possibly for generations, the reality is the entirety of Fox Lake and the land around it is outside the current provincial wilderness area. This is despite the fact that the canoe and portage route includes this and other lakes outside the designation. If it weren't for the hills and the trees behind me, you would then see Corey Lake and Susie's Lake, and on that to Bears Lake Business Park. But in fact, the hills block that view to the industrial sites. So this feels like a bit of solitude in the middle of the city. I'm heading back now along the Hobsons Loop. Now soon I'll come upon a trail called Mike's Hike. That trail would take you down to Charlie's Lake and ultimately back to the south end of Kearney Lake and the Kearney Lake Beach. It will also take you to an ironically named building called Charlie's Mansion, which is an old and very much falling down wood cabin dating back to long before residential and commercial development was so close to this area. So this spot is called Coyote Bog. This area truly is a beautiful space, and it's been recognized municipally and provincially. But it's also been recognized nationally. In 2021, the federal government announced they were going to spend $130 million to start the creation of a network of national urban parks. And this wilderness area is one of the spaces that is under consideration. The federal National Urban Parks Program is a new initiative that has the goal of protecting biodiversity and connecting people to nature in cities. The proposed park here would be up to 10,000 acres if completed and include 22 lakes sitting on this green space between Bears Lake Business Park, Kingswood, and Tantallon. National park designation would bring the capacity needed to manage such an enormous area and help with the trail work that local volunteers have struggled to stay ahead of. Successful national park designation is something that is a great hope for the many people who have volunteered their time to make the Blue Mountain Birch Cove Wilderness a reality. You know, it would be easy to spend days in here just exploring the many trails in this wilderness. You could quite literally get lost. And yet at the same time, here I am so close to businesses and homes. In fact, standing here, I'm only a few hundred meters from where I started this hike. You know, as much as I would like to spend more time here, I have another destination in mind. About 5 kilometers from here, as the crow flies, is Scott Manor House and a trail that has connected Bedford and Sackville. That's after the break.
Won't you be mine? Feel the sunshine.
The Blue Mountain Birch Cove lakes certainly show that you can find wilderness really close to the city. But sometimes it's an urban hike that you're after, something really close to home and just to quickly get away for a stroll. Well, that's what I'm doing today. I'm taking a stroll along the Sackville River, starting here at Scott Manor House and heading all the way to Folt's house in Sackville. Now, Joseph Scott and his wife Margaret built this home, and they arrived in Halifax with Edward Cornwallis in 1749. This is the second oldest home in the municipality. For architecture buffs, this is the only remaining full 2.5-story gambrel roofed colonial building in Nova Scotia, and possibly all of Canada. This property served as a hotel for the railroad at one time. It also served as the home of the Navy's fleet surgeon. Now, in 1856, this property, which would have been a lot bigger, was subdivided and became some of the very first lots in the town of Bedford. When Scott built this home, he built it strategically, right next to Fort Sackville, which was over there. British soldiers arrived in Halifax under the command of Edward Cornwallis at the same time as Joseph Scott. The military was concerned about potential attacks from the French and their allies, the Mi'kmaq. This position at the end of Bedford Basin was an important waypoint along a line of communication to Annapolis Royal. So a sloop loaded with rangers sailed into the basin and established a fortress here. The fort was named Fort Sackville after George Germain, the first Viscount of Sackville. Around 1798, the purpose of the fort changed from defense from the French to a site to watch for military deserters and warn of attack from inland. The location had little importance by 1815, though some of the buildings remained until 1912, when the last one was destroyed by fire. Many people would view this as the actual start of the Bedford Sackville Greenway corridor, and not up at Scott Manor House itself. They wouldn't be entirely wrong. This is certainly a more common access point along the route. This is Fish Hatchery Park, and this was the site of a very important salmon breeding program from 1876 to 1961. Salmon raised here in this river was actually used to stock rivers all across Nova Scotia. It came to an end because of a combination of pollution and runoff, which caused the pollution, as well as people removing gravel from the stream bed, which meant that it was no longer healthy to raise the salmon. Bits and pieces of this trail network have existed for a long time, but until it was completed, there was no legal way to walk from Bedford to Sackville, a distance of only around 5 kilometers. That's part of what makes this trail important, linking communities. The river runs through a pretty commercial area at this point, but it's important to remember that this river draws from a watershed that goes all the way up into East Hants. Of course, it was the commercial development itself that spurred citizens into action to save the river and create this trail connection. The Sackville Rivers Association, for example, was formed in 1988 because it was a particular river system facing neglect. They now help plan trails like this, but also do habitat restoration and education projects. Through years of development, the river has been straightened and the depths leveled out. That isn't good for fish or river health, which require variations to create spawning and rest opportunities, as well as feeding places. This area next to the shopping center is one spot where the river would have been straightened for the purposes of development. Now, that's not just bad ecologically, but it also makes the river more prone to flooding. This is a great example of the impact of the flooding along this river. The trail actually used to be much closer to the water and has been moved in the past year or two inward a bit because of that flooding. The collection of sports fields on my right was once called Range Park, a nod to the rifle range I'm closing in on. But since 2010, it's been officially known as Bud Bremner Park. For 40 years, he was a dedicated volunteer and helped create one of the most successful minor football programs in Nova Scotia. It was this highway, Highway 102, that before this trail was built, prevented people from traveling from Bedford to Sackville by foot or bicycle. Crossing under the highway, I am adjacent to the Department of National Defence's rifle range. This is a part of the larger Canadian Forces Base Halifax complex and is primarily a small arms training facility for the Navy. The mural in this underpass was painted by the children of the Sackville Boys and Girls Club under the direction of renowned Nova Scotia artist Holly Carr. To the left of me is McQuaid Pool, and it's a great example of the habitat restoration that the Sackville Rivers Association has done to try and bring spawning salmon back to this river. At this point, the trail comes to Lynn Court. Now from here to get to Folt's house, where I'm going to be ending my hike, I'll be crossing the road and going over the highway overpass. After a short jaunt across the highway, I've reached Folt's Corner and Folt's house here in Sackville, which is a bookend to my journey, if you will, from Scott Manor House and Fort Sackville. Well, the adventure doesn't have to end here. You can follow the little Sackville River up along formal and informal trails and roads. Not far from here are the Second Lake Trails, and all, like this trail and the Hobsons Lake Trail, offer respites in the wilderness from the urban world. Robert Sweetgull wrote a lot about walking, and he once said that we live in a fast-paced society. Walking slows us down. I hope on your next walkabout, you find a bit of respite from the rat race.
Hey, come on, feel the sunshine. Oh, come on, won't you be mine? Hey, come on, feel the sunshine. Oh, come on, won't you be mine? Oh, hey, oh, hey, oh, hey, feel the sunshine. Oh, hey, oh, hey, oh, hey, feel the sunshine. Hey, come on, feel the sunshine.